For a history you won't forget and an experience you'll always remember, visit the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History with engaging educational programs, lectures, entertainment, and enlightening exhibits. You'll gain valuable insight and be motivated to inform others. The Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, located in the heart of Midtown Detroit. For more information or to schedule a tour, visit thewright.org.
I'm Bruce Armstrong. I'm a child of God, head of my life. I'm an African-American male. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a musician, and I'm an artist. And my medium, preferably, let me put it like this, would like to say multimedia. I somewhat, as I've been defined in several occasions, I'm all over the place. I do a little bit of everything. Acrylics, no oils anymore, charcoal, pencil, sculpture, abstraction, a little figurative. Pretty much about it. Right now I'm looking at studying geometric forms in its relationship to color in an abstract form.
Bruce, what motivated you to get into art?
I always have looked at art as a medium of communication. We have somewhat another vision, or should I say, an opposite vision in terms of what is and what isn't, you know. An artist really has the opportunity to really kind of change things if eyes take a look. And then, of course, from that, conversation rendered, you know. So what got me started was, number one, since it was a God-given talent, I said I've got to do something with this, you know. I can't let it get away. The old cliche: if you don't use it, you lose it, you know. And so with that, and then with a little studying in terms of schooling, tweaking, I says, you need to get back full time. And so in 98, went back to school, started just producing, just seeing where I'm at, what draws my attention, what maybe I'm pretty good at, and what I need to work on that I'm not. And here we are. And then there again, going back to what artists can really make a difference in terms of where we are as a society. And given the chance, I think something can derive of it, not only individually, but collectively in terms of artists.
So when we're talking about art for young people, we know that it's a significant movement going on. Black Lives Matter. And we know there are murals that they've created downtown Indianapolis. Talk a little bit about Black expression, the art expression through African Americans. How does that speak to the current generation? How did your generation speak to your era? Can we tie that in? Could we tie that in?
Yeah, really, Black Lives Matter in terms of the art scene really goes back. When we look at the early '60s and Marvin Gaye, what's going on, that particular African American artists were doing work in reference to that. We still have a discussion in terms of what work do you do, you know? And the discussion is, okay, do you make reference to the African American experience, or do you do art that doesn't depict someone that looks like me? It's still a discussion today, and it was a discussion then because some artists didn't make reference to that. One in particular, his name was Norman Lewis. He did abstract work. There was another one, Sam Gilliam. He did abstract work with unprimed canvas. And the question was always, this doesn't depict African Americans. And he would say, but oh yes, he do. Oh yes, it does. Don't look at the work, maybe look at me. I'm who that looks like you. You know, this is just happened to be what I do. And so moving forward, and so we're duplicating that again. And now it's getting world attention, as well as then when lives were lost. Lives are still being lost. I have a piece in the hallway. I wanted to make a statement. And so I searched around to how I can do it, contrary to what has been done and what has been trying to do now. And I depicted the Statue of Liberty. And I put a Corvid mask on it. And on top of the mask, I put Black Lives Matter. We all know somewhat the history of the Statue of Liberty and immigrants coming into New York, or America, if we could say, on the whole. And so that was my time to make that statement. And they had a protest show here in Indianapolis one time, and we were able to exhibit it. I did another piece of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I depicted a soldier with his fist up of this, you know. So yes, we do what we do, but at times we need to take that time, especially when something occurs as violent and as cruel as this that just happened, and it'll happen again.
Do you have a favorite artist or an art piece that stood out?
Back then, I kind of began to look at Buford Delaney. He was a Paris. He went to Paris during particular times of the late 50s. The United States wasn't real friendly to artists, and to hone their craft, a lot of not only artists, musicians went to Europe to further their craft. And Buford Delaney, I mentioned Norman Scott, coming forward a little bit, Jacob Lawrence. He did a marvelous series of several, but really one stood out, Migration. You know, that was somewhat profound in terms of culturally speaking, you know. And there's some more, but I take a little bit from each one, and I really enjoy their story, and then I put it with what they're doing, and it gives me a really profound concept of who that person is, you know. I love reading their journey, their stories. And then when I look at their work, you know, I say, and now some of those artists have passed that are still living. And one especially, his last name is Marshall. I can't think of his first name. He lives in Chicago. He's one of the first living artists that sold a piece in the millions, yeah, for a living artist. And so those I keep an eye on. And there's several more. Even female, the one that Amy, I forget her last name, that did Mrs. Obama, the president's wife. And then Riley that did the president. They did it their way. They did it their way. I thought that was profound.
What motivates you to start a piece, and how do you know when a piece is finished?
You don't. For me, some of the classes I took, this one particular gentleman, William Taylor, he was a professor at IUPUI of African American Art Studies. And he would tell me, he said, you don't know sometimes that you're done. You just quit. You just stop. Now, you may revisit it, but you stop, you know. And so for me, sometimes if I take a double take and look at it, I said, oh, you're done. The piece of the Statue of Liberty, I played with being done. Then I said, well wait a minute. Are you doing it for our pleasure, or you're doing it for a statement? And I stopped.
How did you start it?
Same way. I have a tendency to, especially in that particular moment, looking at a blank canvas, I actually ask permission that I may do this, that if I can do this, and disturb what is already on a blank canvas, which actually is a piece. It's just we can't see it. Yeah, that's for conversation. And so with that, I asked, okay, what are you going to do? And I asked, after asking for permission, it ended up Statue of Liberty. Because I said historically, that's where it all began for some.
But let's talk a little bit about Indiana art history. Are there many artists, African-American artists? Were there many African-American artists coming up through Indiana's history from the time that you're aware of?
Yes and no. I can't answer yes in terms of fully because I'm really don't know. I know the ones that I encountered through literature, Tanner, Scott, but they left here. They left Indiana, just like African Americans of any level that found themselves with a skill that was profound or beyond, let's say musical, they pretty much left.
Why did they leave?
Didn't have the freedom to exercise their craft or expound on it, you know. During the slavery time, you couldn't exercise something that was God-given, you know. And so jumping ahead, even if after slavery, doing working hours and family, it just wasn't there. But if it was there, you learned through the migration, through Jacob Lawrence in his pieces, you left Indiana, and you went to Chicago, New York, or you went to Europe, where not only freedom was exercised, but you could hone your craft without the oppression of America. Yeah. And so, in terms of Indiana, there were a few that I came across. So one in particular, Joseph Holliday, quite a gifted artist. John Spalding, quite a sculpturist, you know. And it was tough for him here to, you can get caught up trying to get the recognition that you deserve, but you have to remember location, you know. I think that's important, and that was one of the things I would tell a young artist that's coming up. Always realize where you are, you know, in terms of Midwest, East Coast, West Coast, South or North, you know. Take that in consideration. Do your studies in terms of who did it and where did they go. You know, do your studies. Yeah. And so for me, there were a few, and this gentleman, Joseph Holliday, quite an artist. And we would have conversations, you know, in terms of Indiana. And he really was a little bitter about Indiana in not giving him his due. But as I would say to him, that could be with anything. Didn't have to be art, you know. And so either you have to accept it and realize the particular period and continue to move on, you know. And we still, as artists now, get rejection. We get that rejection. And a lot of times, in some cases, it's not about what we're doing. It's about who we are. And you just take that and say, okay, and keep moving.
once COVID releases its grip, there's still going to be a lot of energy out there with individuals, young people, trying to figure out now what path do I take?
Yeah, what path do we take?
What role can art play in helping them discover a direction that they can take?
Remember what just happened, you know, and expound on that. Remember what happened, okay? Hone your craft, number one, you know. Get better, you know, and then keep yourself amongst other artists, whether it be performing or visual. Keep yourself surrounded, you know, because we feed off each other. Stay in conversation, you know, and then just continue to keep moving. And I would say too, whatever your spiritual belief is, trust it. Trust it, because what's for you from a spiritual aspect will be given to you.
Let's talk about some of the pieces here in your studio and what drove you to generate individual pieces. Do you have a piece that stands out? We have a black shovel right there with that's well painted with beautiful colors. You have a young black mannequin standing there with wonderful designs, and then next to her there's a shovel with the U.S. flag on it. Talk about some of the pieces that make up your studio.
In reference to the shovels, I got interested in the African mask, and I found out through some studies that Picasso went to Africa, and he looked at the mask of the Africans in terms of their celebrations, whether it be celebrations, sorrows, harvest, weddings, deaths, etc., etc., etc. And he was really astounded by what he saw. And he came back and began to do what he did, and we all know the work that he produced. He started out very figurative, but he ended up very abstract in terms of his subject matter. But it derived from the African mask. I also looked at it and say, from a regional standpoint, all the African masks were quite different. And so there again, I began to look at it and say, wow, I mean, with all weddings, harvest, youth growing up from puberty to adulthood, the mass celebrations, the dance, you know, but they had represented the African mask. And I said, I'd like to do some work with the African mask. I said, but I don't want to do it on a canvas. That's too European. I want to keep it where it is, and that is Africa. And so the shovel came to mind, because if you turn it upside down and put the handle at the bottom and the face of the shovel up top, you have a canvas. And from a historical standpoint, in terms of slavery, one of the first tools we were given, shovel and a pick. And so the African mask on my shovels became my subject. And I went to the library, looked at masks, took pictures, took Xerox, cut them out, what region, why, you know, and produced some. Had a show, I forget the year, of nothing but shovels. I turned them upside down. They became my canvas, and I've sold a few, and this one here is one of my favorites. It's a nice corner piece, and then a nice story. I've always been interested in geometric forms. If you go all the way back to Egypt and the pyramid, those angles, very sharp. And I says, okay, what would color do next to each other and we call that a hard edge because it's taped. What would a color do next to, what would a yellow and purple next to each other look like with a form, with a geometric form? And so I got on that series and just kept exploring. And who was it? There's a couple of historian artists that dealt with geometric forms, and so I kind of mimicked some of their approach, created some of my own techniques, began to work with various tapes, painter's tape, Scotch tape, masking tape, you know, and come up with a pretty good one. But anyway, that's how that series derived. And then I got just interested in color, period, without a shape or form, without next to each other. You know, what would that, like in school, they give you have a color wheel and all the colors are next to you, going from light to dark, you know. And I would say, normally, you put a yellow, you put a green next to it, you know. You put a blue next to it and you get green. And I would say, well, wait a minute, what if I put a brown next to it? What would that do? What would that do? And sometimes we call that, if you put the colors according to the color wheel, that's an academic form. But if not, what do we have? We have an expression of abstraction. And so, but the mass really was a good study for me in terms of not only why they had them and how they used them, but from a cultural standpoint, profound. And from one of the most famous artists in the world to come away with that. He was just as profound as I was.
Is black art a niche market, and if so, why?
I tend to, sometimes I dislike black artists. I'm an artist who happens to be black. I don't like that handle when I'm in other circles. Black art, but I say, excuse me, let's not say that. I'm an artist who happens to be black. You know, you don't hear Chinese artists, yellow artists, you don't hear that. You don't hear that. You don't hear white artists, you don't hear that. You don't hear Korean, you don't hear that. And so I pick and choose sometimes when I'm okay with it, but most of the times I'm not. I like to say I'm an artist who happens to be black. And if you can look at me that way, then I think we start off on another foot, you know. And I've been in situations, you know, well, we're kind of not sure about some of the black art, and I stopped. I said, hold it, stop, let's stop. Let's talk about content. We can talk academic, and let's leave black art alone. Let's leave that alone, and let's just communicate in terms of one artist or curator to another.
Do they devalue art based on the ethnic?
Yeah, that's one of the things I have felt, that with that comes a devalued, invisible devalued sense. You know, if I put a piece of abstract up and put my counterpart piece up, but if I leave the room, I doubt if he would know that I'm a black artist, unless I do a figurative piece, you know. I doubt if he know if I did a landscape, if I'm a black artist, you know. But if we're communicating, already he knows, and I'm already in a sense devalued, because that's just the way it is, and it goes back to 1619.
How do we transfer the understanding of discipline has to play a role in your journey in order to accomplish the process?
You're going to have to really make up in your mind, if this is what I want to do, is this what I want to do? And as I read Michael Jordan's book, and he spoke of several times, you have to put in the work. Educate yourself. Surround yourself with those that do what you would like to do, you know. Accept what that gives you. Accept it. But I go back to what Michael Jordan said. You have to put in the work. You have to be prepared.
How have you evolved as an artist? And what's the future for Bruce?
I'm still looking. I was talking to a musician. I love to read their stories. And if you say you're there, you've shortchanged yourself. You will cease to grow. But if you say or tell yourself, I'm still working, I'm still at it. I had a client ask me one time, he looked around, he said, what's your best piece in here? What's your most rewarding piece of art in here? I said, it's not here. I haven't done it yet. I haven't done it. And he said, I said, I haven't done it. I said, there's a blank canvas. That could be it. Just sign it. It could be. But I don't know yet. And so you can't say, layman, you arrived. Because if you do say that, you're going to quickly find out that you haven't. And more than likely, you won't be ready for that. One of my favorite pieces is back there in the corner. It's of myself and my granddaughter. We were down in Gulf Shore, and somebody took a photo, and I grabbed it, and I said, oh, and then I did a piece with it in some of what an expressionistic form. It's not really realism, but I know who it is, and that's the joy. And so I use that as a reference in terms of enjoyment. If you get a piece, and not so much from me, but from any artist who happens to be black, that you see the enjoyment as much as they produced it.
As art for African Americans grow, what would you share with the movement of artists going into a new era, whatever that era may be? I know BLM, Black Lives Matter, is an era. Mm-hmm. And I know everyone is focusing on art surrounding Black Lives Matter, mm-hmm. the movement. Mm-hmm. But there is an after the movement.
Mm-hmm. Use it as a door opening. Begin to think of African American art as an investment, as a cultural investment, you know. Not so much something that you just put on the wall. That's fine, and that you enjoy, that's fine. But look at it as wealth, you know. There's only a few of color collectors who begin to look at that, you know, and didn't put a particular plateau value on each artist, but enjoyed a piece, saw a piece, and saw how interested in it was, but then put it in the realm also of investment. As we become more adaptable to wills, put that in there. Oh, I got a piece on the wall. Maybe I'll write that down to my children, you know, to their children's children, and begin to look at that as a collective wealth beyond yourself.
We talked a little bit about Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On."
Oh, yeah, my man.
Well, as an artist, how is that song or the imagery? Mm-hmm. How does the imagery of that song penetrate your heart and mind?
From a musician standpoint, the words are still reverent. I played it just the other day, and several musicians play it, you know. But I listened to a group that backed Motown, Funk Brothers, and then Shaka Khan sung it. But then I played it over and over, just getting the melody, some of the notes, I mess around. But listen to the words. You know, what's going on? You know, what's love and hate? When are we gonna do that? You know, and war is not the answer. And I think, I got to thinking, I said, oh, back then, you know, we were doing the dance that we were doing, but making reference to it because it was what's going on. And here we are again, you know, asking the same question, you know. I think America needs to ask that. They need to ask that, you know. And maybe collectively we can really come up with an answer. But in terms of art, we're going to keep doing this. The BLM, it's going to run its course, but then we have to pick it up and pound on another door. And then ask that question, what's going on in here? You know, and go from there.